Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing fine. I sure miss meeting with all of you. This has been very difficult, I think, for all of us. The isolation, and for me, I have been given special permission to come up here in my office because of the things I have to do, and so I'm allowed in this building. But I kind of spend all my day alone here, and this isn't how teaching's supposed to be. I've had a lot to do in my other courses to keep that going up because this course was the easiest to say, look, you've got the readings, just do them and write your course review. That would be the easiest thing. That frees me up on these others where a lot of the stuff I need to do, I do in class. And so I had to do a lot of writing and have had to do a lot of writing. But anyway, I wanted to spend some time, and I hope I can upload this because trying to upload stuff on the internet on YouTube has been slow as can be. And I'm going to just do 10, 15 minutes here and then try to upload it and see if it works. Anyway, I don't have a tie on. I apologize. I did bring a tie, but I forgot to put it on, so pretend it's there. Anyway, enduring to the end is the last key that you are looking at, and there's a number of things, a number of issues enduring to the end in marriage, and trials are a major part of that. Being tried and tested about your loyalty to each other, about you and your spouse's loyalty to God, and will He be first in your life? Remember, we're trying to get a people ready right now for the second coming and the millennium. The millennium will get us ready for the return to the Father and Mother. Here, we're proving our worthiness to join the next phase of our growth and development in the millennium. And we have two periods of growth and development prior to the millennium: our mortal life and then our life back in the spirit world. And leaving this life and going to the spirit world is called death. And that's a very difficult aspect in marriage. Death between a husband and wife, death with a family member, son, daughter, or grandchild. I've not experienced the loss of my wife. I came very close back when she was 30 years old, when she had 2 strokes. And then the next few years, very close to her dying. Haven't lost any of my children, but I did lose a grandchild. And my son, who actually had to conduct the funeral, asked if I would speak. That was the hardest funeral talk I've ever given. I've spoken at a lot of funerals of former students, both my parents, my father-in-law, close friends. But speaking at my granddaughter's funeral was the hardest talk I've ever given in my life. I have great trust and confidence in God, and I believe in His timetable. When I was growing up, the rock era was just really starting and booming. There was a band called the Byrds, and one of their big hits was called "Turn, Turn, Turn." Perhaps you heard it, and it's a song where there's a lot of quoting from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get, a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to cast away, a time to rend, a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to, excuse me, a time to rend, a time to sow, a time to keep silence, time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time of war, a time of peace. Birth and death are on the Lord's timetable. I don't know if this is going to work. I've put some quotes on the, let me see if I can do this, how it does. Oh, I also won't do it. Oh well. Okay, on the reading schedule, I have added teachings concerning physical death. There was a talk given in General Conference by Elder Sterling W. Sill, who was an assistant to the 12 for many years, and then when they reinstituted the Quorum of the 70, he was a member of the Quorum of the 70. For about 20 some odd years, they used to have a fireside that was broadcast on Sunday night over KSL radio. And for over 20 years, the fireside speaker was Elder Sterling W. Sill. He had a great understanding of the gospel and a great voice. And I remember hearing a lot of those, just great. And as he drew closer to his death, one of the last talks he gave was about death. And here's what he said. Two of the most important events in life are birth and death. What a thrilling thing it is to be well born, to have goodly parents and to live in a godly home. But it may be even more important to die well. Sometimes we miss one of the best opportunities to learn to die well because we think of death as unpleasant. And because we don't like to think of unpleasant things, we sometimes close our minds and turn away our faces. But death doesn't cease to exist just because it's ignored. The ancient Egyptians had a much more logical way of handling this situation. Now, see, this is why I like this. You talked about ancient Egyptians. Me, the archaeologist, studied Egypt. Yeah, I love this. The ancient Egyptians had a much more logical way of handling this situation. When, on their great festive occasions, they kept constantly on display before the revelers the skeleton of a dead man. That is, they held up this great image of death before themselves that each one might be continually and constantly reminded that someday he would die. That was true of the Egyptians, and death wasn't necessarily a bad thing. That was the next stage of progression, and da-da-da-da-da-da. As it is for us as LDS. Elder Sill continues. Now, I don't want to frighten anyone unduly in this audience this morning, but I would like to point out as gently and as kindly as I can that someday this tremendously important experience of our mortal estate will come to its end. Someone has said that, judging by the past, there'll be very few of us who get out of this world alive. From the very beginning of life, each one of us lives under an irrevocable, unchangeable death sentence with a guarantee that it will be carried out. Now, I said that to my sisters once, that we all have a death. They kind of, oh, that's a morbid view. I go, why is that a morbid view? We're all going to die and move on. We certainly don't want this life to be forever. And they went, wow, yeah, both of them have their issues. Yeah, they're exactly right. Now, so we do have a death sentence. The Lord has given us this maximum notice to enable us to adequately prepare for it. And one man indicated this certainly by an inscription on his tombstone saying, I knew it would happen. And it has been said that one of the most important events in life is death. We live to die, and then we die to live. Death is a kind of graduation day for life. It's our only means of entrance to eternal life. And it seems to me to be a very helpful procedure to spend a little time pre-living our death. That is, what kind of person would you like to be when the last hour of your life arrives? The last hour is the key. That is the hour that judges all other hours. No one can tell whether or not his life has been successful until his last hour. As Sophocles said, we must wait till evening to know how pleasant the day has been. And his last statement in his introduction, what a thrilling experience that we may live well, enabling us to die well, and then live with God in the celestial kingdom throughout eternity. In the Doctrine and Covenants, in section 42, this is known as the law. This was the beginning of the law of Zion, including the law of consecration. This is the law for the members of the church. One of those laws dealt with the concept of death. Someone gets sick, well, the law says we can call elders and they can lay their hands on our head and give us a blessing of healing. Section 42, verse 44, you can pause this and go find it. Section 42, verse 44. It says, and the elders of the church, 2 or more, shall be called and shall pray for and lay their hands upon them in my name. And if they die, they shall die unto me. If they live, they shall live unto me. Thou shalt live together in love, insomuch that thou shalt weep for the loss of them that die, and more especially for those that have no hope for a glorious resurrection. And it shall come to pass that those that die in me shall not taste of death, for it shall be sweet unto them. And they that die not unto me, woe unto them, for their death is bitter. Then this statement, verse 48. And again, it shall come to pass that he that hath faith in me to be healed, and is not appointed unto death, shall be healed. So, several things in here that I want to discuss. Number one, thou shalt live together in love, and thou shalt weep for the loss of them that die. Those of you who were raised in an American culture were raised in a culture that does not have true death rituals. By that I mean, we don't have rituals that we actually go through to deal with death. Most cultures do. In the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, you hear stories where someone has died and the mourners have come, hired mourners who come and mourn. And our culture goes, wow, that's really weird. And you have someone who mourns for you? No, they're not mourning for you. They're doing an extremely important activity. They're establishing a stage or a setting of mourning. It's very appropriate to mourn the loss of someone close. When I was doing my doctoral work, we were studying about old age in one of my courses, and as we were dealing with old age, we had to deal with the concept of death. And I remember learning in the reading in our textbooks and so forth, learning that that when someone close to an individual dies, their body secretes a hormone that is disruptive to the body, disruptive to the immune system. It actually can break the immune system down. And it will eventually kill the person if that hormone is not dissipated. And they learned that dissipation comes through mourning. I don't know why, but that's what we learned. America doesn't have real mourning rituals. Various cultures in America can, but mainly we don't. You know, someone dies, you're supposed to be tough. And in the church, we have very optimistic understanding of death, and we approach death by faith and knowing that they're not really dead; they've passed to another stage of existence. But that doesn't mean someone doesn't mourn. Again, the Lord said, "Thou shalt live together in love, insomuch as thou shalt weep for the loss of them that die." 27 years ago, I had a student in my class that came from the high school where my kids were going to attend high school. They were quite young at that time, and this kid was an amazing guy. He was a very likable social guy. He was a very strong member of the church. He was a very good basketball player, and he was tall, and he was a very good sportsman, and he was very good at what he did, and he was really liked well by people. And he graduated and came here and was in the fall of his first semester. He was in my class and just enjoyed him in there. And then I noticed that he started not to attend, and this went on for a couple of weeks. Got a little worried and was able to contact and find out that he had cancer, and it was terminal cancer. And before that semester was over, he died. I went to the viewing. They had a viewing the morning of his funeral, and at a stake center, and they anticipated a lot of people come. I don't think they anticipated how many people would come that morning. But the viewing was actually held in the Stake Center Cultural Hall, and they had roped off a whole line. It's like going through security at an airport, how they have lines, that rope that goes down forming serpentine lines. And I got in there and was going down, and as I was watching, you know, LDS, when they get together, very social people, we talk, and everyone's talking. It was really quite loud in there, and everyone talking and enjoy. And there was a group of girls who I knew him, and they were all together, and they were laughing and so forth. And then the closer I kept watching, the closer they got to when it was their turn. Then finally it was their turn. They came up to the open casket and saw Alan, and just burst out into tears and weeping and mourning. And the whole room went silent. And it was awkward. And it shouldn't have been awkward. They had a right to mourn for someone that they were very close to. And I felt bad. It was awkward for them. When someone close dies, it's okay to mourn. We can't let it destroy us, but it's okay to mourn. And this is coming to one of the points I want to make. I mean, not only must we trust that God has a timetable for when we live and die, and trust in that timetable. And that when someone dies that's close, it's okay to mourn. That's the second point I want to make. I want to make a third point. This is a difficult world to live in. One of the things we learn from the story of Adam and Eve as portrayed in the temple account is that when together they were strong. The fall occurred when they were tempted apart from each other. Every situation in a marriage is different when a spouse dies. But I want to tell you, it is appropriate for the living spouse to remarry. It's not a it's not saying anything about the love of the living person towards his spouse that's died or her spouse that's died. When my wife and I were engaged in the short 2-month period between asking her to marry me and then getting engaged, went up to her family's place, and we went around to people in her ward that she knew very well, and she introduced me to 2 older couples who were in their late or early 50s, I think. And during the next few years, the husband of one and the wife of the other of 2 particular couples that she introduced me to, and these 2 couples actually were good friends in the ward. And the husband of one, the wife of the other died. And the husband of the one had a good job that had a retirement with it. The husband that was living, the husband that had died did not have a retirement, and frankly did not leave his wife in a really good financial situation. So these 2, Ron and Alice, were their names. Well, he's now passed on. She's still living. But Ron and Alice eventually courted, got married. It was a good marriage for both of them. Both of them were very clear about the love they had for their dead spouse, all the way to the end of their married life. They were married with each other as long as they had been married to their spouses when Ron died. They loved each other, but always, even in their bearing the testimony in church, they expressed their love for their spouse and they looking forward to meeting them. And then you would see them walking hand in hand out of the sacrament meeting. It was really rather an interesting thing. It was a very instructive. She was able to financially handle which for her was going to be a potentially long life. She's still alive. She's in her late 80s, early 90s. They served 2 missions together. They really pitched in, did a lot of family history work and a number of things together. When my wife and I moved from Arizona to here back in 1989, moved into our ward, they moved into our ward shortly after that, and we renewed our acquaintances and became very close friends. And for years, I was their home teacher. And Ron had always asked, when I die, I want you to speak at my funeral. It's in the will. My kids know about it. I want you to speak. You know, for years, he would remind me every time he'd see, I want you to speak. Well, a few years ago, I got a phone call and it was Alice. She said, "Hi, this is Alice Olson." I go, "Oh, Alice. Ron must have died." "Yes, he died last night. And you know, he wanted you to speak at his funeral. And he wanted you to give very much a doctrinal talk." And so I did. And I spoke, went out to the cemetery for the dedication of the grave, and I stood right next to Alice as they did all that. And their families were all there, both families, their children, their grandchildren, etc., both there. And then after that was over, I put my arm around. We just kind of stood and looked off into the distance together. And she said, "You know, Ron and I were married as long as, and my husband and I were." I said, "You know what?" And I have no question about this. As soon as Ron died, Pastor the Vel, your husband was there to express his gratitude for taking care of you in this life, financially, spiritually. How grateful he was for what you did. We're told in the scriptures, it's not good for man to be alone. I remember when I was teaching in Jerusalem, there was they have older couples who are doing service kinds of missions, and one's there handling all the books, the financials, and so forth. And anyway, he and his wife, this was their second marriage, and he bore testimony, and his wife died. He wasn't really much interested in remarrying, but he heard a voice saying, "It's not good for man to be alone." And he kept hearing that, realized, I need to remarry. It's no insult on the partner who has died. I have told my wife for most our married life that if I die first, please remarry. Please find someone. This is a hard world to live in, and loneliness is a bitter pill. And I don't want my wife to be lonely. I want someone who will take care of her. Love in marriage isn't always about romance. Love is an unselfish concern for the other person. I bear testimony to you that we develop a charity love, a love for our spouse that goes beyond romance. I do not look forward to her or I dying, separation, but I hope she remarries. It wouldn't be an insult to me. I